The once stalled U.S. military aid to Ukraine is at the center of the impeachment storm going on in Washington. But it's also at the center of another storm between Russia and Ukraine. Since 2014, the U.S. has given about $1.5 billion in security assistance to Ukraine in order to enhance the Eastern European country's military capabilities in the face of Russian aggression. As a reminder, Russia in 2014 invaded the Ukrainian Crimean Peninsula, entangling Ukraine in a land war that's been in a stalemate for roughly the last 5 years. The Obama administration and members of Congress on both sides of the aisle at the time condemned the move as a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty.
That does not justify Russia encroaching on Ukraine's territorial integrity or sovereignty. That's exactly what's happened. And I said very early on that should Russia do so, there would be consequences.
They supported sanctions against Russia and assistance to Ukraine. Here's what was clear. American support for Ukraine was a way to counter Russian aggression. For example, then Senator John McCain said at the time of the invasion, quote, "Every moment that the United States and our allies fail to respond sends the signal to President Putin that he can be even more ambitious and aggressive in his military intervention in Ukraine." And experts say the same holds true today. Here's former Ambassador Mike Wigfall.
Vladimir Putin loves that. I mean, he wants all military assistance to Ukraine halted forever. And when they see that, not only do they applaud the concrete objective, but the secondary effect of making Ukraine look weak and dependent on the United States also serves the Kremlin's interests.
American aid to Ukraine has both a symbolic and a practical purpose. More than 10,000 people have been killed since the start of the war. In June, the Department of Defense announced $250 million to Ukraine to provide, among other things, sniper rifles, rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and weapon detection equipment. Separately, the State Department would provide $141 million.
Without question, the United States is Ukraine's most important military ally right now. That those numbers represent a major part of their defense budget and some unique weapons, including the javelins, these anti-tank missiles, that without them, they have no other way to acquire that kind of military technology. So they are extremely dependent on the United States to help them deter Russian aggression.
But in July, the Trump administration blocked this assistance before the phone call with President Vladimir Zelensky, citing two main reasons: his belief that European countries didn't hold up their fair share.
Well, we're working with Ukraine, and we want other countries to work with Ukraine. When I say work, I'm referring to money. They should put up more money. We put up a lot of money.
But this isn't entirely true. As NBC News reports, the European Union put up $16.5 billion in financial aid, according to a fact sheet from the EU's diplomatic arm. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, said it would put forward at least $14 billion in a bailout as well. And corruption.
We're supporting a country. We want to make sure that country is honest. It's very important to talk about corruption. If you don't talk about corruption, why would you give money to a country that you think is corrupt?
Experts largely agree that the U.S. aid to Ukraine was crucial in helping the Eastern European country fight off its neighbor, Russia. As an example, Colonel Andriy Ordinovich, a Ukrainian military official, told the Military Times that when Ukraine received radar systems in 2015, the casualty rates of units who were given those radars dropped from 47% to 18%. Additionally, experts say that Russia's continued occupation of Ukraine rests not only on physical aggression, but also on a disinformation campaign. The main narrative of this campaign is that Ukraine is a failed state with no global standing and should probably just be under Russian control. Halting aid from one of the most powerful countries in the world and a previously consistent backer plays directly into this message. The administration ultimately released the aid to Ukraine in mid-September after bipartisan criticism of the decision, and because they were concerned that Trump withheld the aid to gain personal political leverage. Still, at least 5 House committees are investigating the decision to halt the aid, and both the Pentagon and the Office of Management and Budget have been subpoenaed.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here. And click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.